Okay, everybody, welcome back. Or should I say welcome back to the survivors. The topic of this last panel of the day is beyond documentation, so I think it's going to be a very productive continuation, perhaps even radicalization of the discussion we had in the previous panel. We've decided to slightly alter the order of the speakers because our first speaker is being beamed in from India, and so we don't want to make her wait too long in the Zoom waiting room. And that way, then she can follow the other two papers as well, and we'll have the discussion at the end. My understanding is that we're a bit restricted by time, so we won't be able to go too much past 6 o'clock. We will go past 6 o'clock, but not a long time because we have then the next keynote. Okay, so it's my great pleasure then to welcome our first speaker, Gayatri A. from JNU University in Delhi. Welcome, Gayatri. She's a PhD student at JNU in the School of Arts and Aesthetics, and she's working on the contemporary performance art in India, and she's also done a master's in history of art from the National Museum Institute and a bachelor's in history from the University of Delhi. And over the past years, she's been working very intensely on this whole area of performance art in India, something I think here in Europe we don't hear a lot about. So it's great that she will be presenting here in this conference. She's also written a dissertation on Ravindra Reddy and the famous Indian sculptor. And she's also worked as a gallery coordinator at the Art-Centric Space and also at the National Gallery of Modern Art in New Delhi. So it's great having you here, albeit not in person, and she'll be giving a presentation on performance art and the photo archive in South Asia. The floor is yours, Gayatri.
Thank you for that introduction. I'll share my screen now. All right. Performance art and the photo archive in South Asia, a critical analysis. This paper is an attempt to look into the intersection between performance art and photography through two case studies from the South Asian context, chosen from the point of commonality shared by them or the authority of the performance artist on the respective photo archive. First is the Delhi-based artist Inder Salim, and the second is the Dhaka-based multidisciplinary artist Yasmin Jahan Nubur. The main corpus of the visual record shown here comes from the artist's own archive that is selectively curated for their own portfolios of publication, print, and online. The case studies are chosen based on the role played by photography before, during, and after the act of performance, analyzing various positions that are taken by the performance artists with respect to their relationship with the photographers, the camera, and the photograph. Some of the questions include, why do artists want photo documentation? If there is a deliberate attempt made by the artist to record the activity in a certain way, how does the artist confront the camera? Does it intimidate them or enhance their performance? I hope to critically look at the photo archive falling under the category of the documentary and the theatrical/performed, the latter being a product of collaborative creative work. And through a comparative analysis, I try to deal with the authorship and representation of performance art photographs. To begin with, Inder Salim has been experimenting with performance for more than 25 years, exploring the limits of the body to raise issues that are socio-political and environmental. My focus here is on the work titled Ghazal Numa, which is an ongoing series of paired images, a result of his recent long durational performances called Harkate Tawil. The images are chosen and selectively woven together to create a visual couplet that resonates with the form of poetry called ghazal. To explain this further, the artist takes a philosophical stance while looking at his own performance photographs. Rather than just seeing them as mere documentation or chunk of data, he tries to create a rhythmic structure by juxtaposing two images together that are connected by a line of thought, similar to the recurring phrase or refrain in ghazal poetry. Slide 1 on the right is a photograph of the artist's performance at Mandi House, Delhi, against the destruction of trees during the Commonwealth Games that was held at the capital in 2010. The photograph was captured by a passerby in the middle of the street on request by the artist. The performance began with the artist appearing completely nude, leaning over a dead tree trunk in a state of mourning. This photograph is paired with a painting that he discovered right after the performance at the Lalit Kala Academy while flipping through a book on Persian miniatures. The painting here depicts Majnu leaning over the cenotaph of his beloved Layla in a strikingly similar posture. Slide 2 shows Inder Salim's durational performance dialogue with power plants shrill across.
Excuse me, Gaza, can you speak a bit slower because we're having a little bit of interference and your words are a little bit mangled. So just try and speak a little bit slower, please. It would help us understand.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Slide 2 shows Inder Salim's durational performance dialogue with power plant shrill across Dead River, performed at the banks of Yamuna River in the summer of 2002. The performance consisted of Inder Salim amputing his finger on the left hand using a surgical knife and an antiseptic, later throwing the same in the river as a form of protest against a serious environmental and political crisis that the country was facing. The photograph on the left shows the artist with his amputated finger covered in a band-aid while holding a flask in his right hand, with the other half of the finger in it, captured here moments before the act of immersing the same in the river. The performance was recorded using a video camera and a still camera by a few of his close friends. This photo document is paired with a mixed media work on the right, figure 3, that uses two photographic depictions of his healed left hand, one in black and white and holding a feather, while the other in color, in turn, is depicted as holding the black and white photograph. The work was inspired by a premonition after his 2004 photo performance titled I Had to Ampute to See. Here the artist places his amputated hand covering half of his face. The sort of empty space created by the missing part gave him a new perceptual frame to look at the world. The photo performance and the subsequent use of photographs in creating a mixed media work led him into his second amputation in 2018 as part of Nothing Is Outside Delhi, Cologne, Basil, Delhi. Second amputation took place in Delhi. The amputated finger was tied up with the other half and brought to Cologne, where it was preserved for 7 days and later was cooked in a flask from the steam of which a meal was prepared and distributed. In figure 5, one can see the swollen little finger on the right in his photo performance performed after a gap of 14 years from the one on the left performed in 2004.
Excuse me, we're still only seeing the first image, the opening image. It hasn't advanced.
Oh no, okay. I'm on my third slide. I don't know what to do now.
Yeah, we're still only seeing slide number 1. Yeah, now.
How about now?
Yeah, now it's better. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I'll just sum it up real quick. This was one of the visual couplet that I had created, where this is a photograph of his performance, and it's a painting that he kind of kept together to make a kind of diptych kind of couplet. And this is the first amputation performance, where he's seen with his amputated finger, with his friend kind of capturing it in a video camera. This was performed in 2002. He creates a photograph, kind of a mixed media work in 2016 called A Premonition. And this is the other photograph that I was talking about. I can just so this photo document is paired with a mixed media work. I can just repeat myself, I think. That uses two photographic depictions of his healed left hand. One is black and white, holding a feather, while the other in color, in turn, is depicted as holding the black and white photograph. The work was inspired by a premonition after his 2004 photo performance titled I Had to Ampute to See. Here, the artist places his amputated hand covering half of his face The sort of empty space created by the missing part gave him a new perceptual frame to look at the world. The photo performance and the subsequent use of photographs in creating a mixed media work led him into his second amputation in 2018 as part of Nothing Is Outside, Delhi Cologne Basel, Delhi. Second amputation took place in Delhi. The amputated finger was tied up with the other half, brought to Cologne, where it was preserved for 7 days and later was cooked in a flask, from the steam of which a meal was prepared and distributed. In figure 5, one can see the swollen little finger on the right in his photo performance performed after a gap of 14 years from the one on the left performed in 2004. Uh, in this uh, figure, we see his work Understanding Mandala, performed in Japan in 2018. Shown here is with the help of two photographs. The performance environment consisted of a circle made out of leaves, and in the center was a dummy dodo bird carrying a label around its neck that said Dodo in silence. The audience was invited to be an active participant in the performance and were given the instruction to sit in a circle facing outside. The artist then entered the center, took his clothes off, and kept the bird on the head, creating a second pedestal for the bird. Thereafter, he kept the bird down and put his clothes back. The participants were shown a photograph on the left, figure 6, taken again by an audience member on the request of the artist for a single shot of his nude body in performance. Derived from the concept of the Buddhist mandalas that have the spiritual configuration of the gods in the center and other deities facing in the direction of the central god figure, the artist here tries to change the direction of the audience purposely towards the outside. To quote the artist, just like the empty bird, the photograph is also empty as it says nothing about what the performance was about. My second case study is Yasmin Jahan Nupur, the Dhaka, Bangladesh-based multidisciplinary artist working in a variety of mediums from installation, painting, photography to performance. Yasmin's works revolve around themes of colonialism, the revival of traditional fine weaving tradition called Jamdani, gender roles, body movements, and the socio-political realities of Dhaka. I explore here the dynamics between Yasmin and her husband, Mani Mritik, who is also a multidisciplinary artist working on image-based mediums. Not only are her performances mostly documented by Mani Mritik, but they also produce collaborative photo works. In this figure is one such work in a Lady and Thrones, 2018 figure 8. The artist's body is intertwined and is in tight embrace with the tree. The hair intertwined with the thorns and the softness of the body against the sharp branches depict a physical act that embodies women's universal experience of visual violence and sexuality. Another collaboration was part of the Chobi Mela International Festival of Photography in Bangladesh 2021. The series of photographs called Time Could Not Be Kept at Bay used objects found at home during the COVID-19 pandemic 2020. To quote the artist, I tried to stage the photograph using simple objects as I use in my performances. Also, I included my daughter in these photographs. I make these photographs along with my husband, who is a photographer. I sometimes draw ideas. In the final production, I used some words from my poems. I'm not a photographer. My husband shoots the images and edits and processes them. I'm involved in every aspect of it. The idea is mine. So the final product is what I produce. He is the support, even for the performances, majorly he is the one shooting. Performance is dealing directly with the viewers. Many people are witness to it. Photographs are more intimate. I take time to make a photograph, sometimes 6 months. It's a process. I want to experience time and the relationship between the photograph and the body. Photo performance is a kind of staging and real performance happens in real time. They are quite different from each other and are not parallel. When performing, I'm really into my body, especially during a 6-hour performance or more. It's really hard to spend with my time with my body. In performance, there are a lot of sequences, but in photography, there is only one sequence. Performance artists such as Inder Salim and Yasmin Jahan Nupur stand by the view that photographs of their performances isn't their live performance, but just a document of the same. The actual performance happens live, and what remains is the visual records. What comes out of these discussions with performance artists is the different philosophical positions taken by them with regard to documentation. All of these can be associated with the idea of liveness that each one associates with their work. For some artists, it would take the extreme level of a no documentation policy. Performance art in its form and materiality has opened up debates on the liveness or the on one hand and on the visual record / mediateness of the performative act on the other. These debates are essential premises on which the intersection of photography and performance can be understood. The concept of the live appear not just among the performance artists, but also among photographers who record the performance. The different positions taken by each of them raise ethical questions related to authorship and representation of the performance remains. The live in performance art, that is, in any embodied temporal form of art, is when the action takes place in the immediacy of now. While this event can be recorded, the record of the event is seen radically different in experience than the immediate event. Deviating from Philip Oslander's claim of the existence of life after the invention of technology and Peggy Phelan's emphasis on the immateriality of performance where the performative act's disappearance itself forms part of the visual record, author Diana Taylor in her work The Archive and the Repertoire focuses on the recordings of performance art as part of the archival memory. What changes over time is the value, relevance, and meaning of the archive. How the items it contains get interpreted, even the embodied ones. The object become an archive when it is selected, classified, and presented for analysis. The archive is subject to change and manipulation, unlike popularly held belief of it being unchangeable and incorruptible. The question of disappearance of performance affects differently for the archive and the repertoire. In the specific case of Inder Salim, the photographs acts as a double barrel, a barrel. A concept he derives from the burial tradition practice in Kashmir. The documentary photograph of a live performance is seen by the artist as a burial, which when retrieved and paired with another image acts as a second burial. In this way, the new image-based performance takes a ritualistic turn. To quote the artist, the documented image can give us more than one reason to look at. More than a representative image, the artist chooses to create a new meaning out of his own archive. With regard to the authorship of these documentary photographs, he believes in the ownership rights of the photographer. To quote the artist, if someone shoots me on the street or anywhere, someone carrying a camera creates a photograph. The image belongs to them and I'm not insecure about it. Performance art is more about becoming rather than the production of images. To a large extent, the photographs were shot by random photographers that he met during his performances. Most of these photographs that are left behind are not professional shots. Some of them tend to be blurry or dark or without any composition in mind. However, this does not affect the memory of the artist, as for him, any images that survive of his performance are important but not the final outcome. The images that are selectively chosen for Ghazal Numa are based not on the studium, using Bharatian terminology, that is the various elements in the photographic plane that gives us an idea of what went on during the performative act. For the artist, each of these images are juxtaposed and decontextualized according to the punctum that drives him. That is, the details that either evoke shock, excitement, or a deeper meaning. In this case, the artist, so to say, attempts in altering the archival memory and acts as an exemplar of the conceptual system of archival photography proposed by Okwui and Visor in the Archive Fever, uses of the document in contemporary art. To quote, without the photographic or filmic record of events or performance, the condition of reality on which they received effect as work of art depended would not have existed. A world of practices staged as much for itself as for the camera. Both these cases under consideration unapologetically uses a photographic document, leading to a pertinent question of the authority over the images used by the artist in different capacities to create a work of art. The ethical concern regarding the documentation of performance art can be investigated through the case of performance artist Joseph Beuys, whose artwork in 1964 called The Silence of Marshall Duchamp is overrated. The performance wasn't recorded and exists solely in the photographs taken by documentary photographer Manfred Tischer. Tischer photographed artists in Düsseldorf, Germany, and other parts of the world from 1958 and 85. The museum's Schloss Meuland in Germany houses the largest archive of the artist. The museum ran into trouble over 18 photographs of Tischer that were part of the 2009 exhibition. The estate had forged a copyright infringement on these unpublished photographs that were displayed without their consent. Following this claim, the regional court of Düsseldorf have ruled in favor of Beuys's estate, giving the explanation that the photographs were not artistically reworked enough, meaning the photographs depicted the copyrighted live performance of Joseph Beuys with the least amount of change, as the photographer did not do a free adaptation of the performance to the extent that the photograph depicted the original live performance. The ruling here claims that the photographs of a performance, if not artistically altered by the photographer, and if they were merely documentary in nature will fall into copyright issues with the artist. In this particular case, it's not even the artist, but his estate. My inquiry into this would be, why is there an issue in the first place? The ethics on the authorship of photographs gets complicated as they enter the art market, as a significant amount of the monetary value gets attached to the visual record, sometimes more than the performance art itself. This makes it even more frustrating for artists who had to navigate through this in order to make a living out of their performances. These different standpoints need to be collated with the copyright law in India, 1957, which is applicable in Inder's case, where under the section for performers' right, a performer is defined as anyone who makes a performance, an actor, singer, musician, dancer, etc. A performer has the right to record the performance, to reproduce the sound recording or visual recording of the performance, to broadcast, to communicate, and to the section sustained for 25 years. The law takes steps to protect the performance artists with respect to the recordings and broadcasting of their works. But these photographs taken of them do not just play the role of documentation as many artists would imagine, but the image produced in itself has an aesthetic value and taste. The photographer's decision to capture the body in movement and the aesthetic tools of using various technical tools to produce an image of the performance alludes to the creative investment of the photographer. The issue of ownership over performance photographs is essentially the case of art after technological invention, the camera. The concept of what is original underwent a drastic change with the coming of photographic reproduction. Walter Benjamin, in the work of art, 1936, notes that in the age of reproductive technology, what shrinks is the aura of the work. The multiple copies thus produced shift the unique indice into multiple indices. And with the proximity of these reproduction to the person apprehending, the uniqueness of the aura goes for a toss, as it actualizes that what is reproduced. He says that the uniqueness of the work of art is identical to its embeddedness in the context of tradition. The reproduced work of art is an ever-increasing extent the reproduction of a work of art designed for reproducibility. This explained by the photographic plate that is capable of multiple prints where the concept of genuineness become redundant. This is further discussed in Rosalind Cross's The Originality of the Avant-Garde, a postmodernist repetition. By looking at the modernism's pioneering work, Cross notes that the concept of originality becomes more important for the avant-garde, where everything created is seen as an absolute new. Are we not involved here in clinging to a culture of originals, which has no place among the reproductive mediums? The photographs of performance art and its ability for multiple reproductions, not just in the number of positives that can be developed from the negative film, but with the coming of the digital age, this question of the genuine print makes no sense. Giving another example of Indian artist, Ratnabali Kant, whose archive mostly comprises of color prints that were shot originally on film, are now digitized, and these digital copies exist as a soft and hard copy of the original photograph, which is later printed using a modern day printer for making the artist's archive. This further complicates the mechanical view of authorship proposed by Cross, where the idea of the print that is closest to the aesthetic moment, the period which is contemporaneous to which when the object was photographed by the photographer, becomes a genuine print. This is also true for photographers who don't make their own prints, or when they edit the photographs so much later in time. For Cross, then authenticity becomes the function of the doesn't become the function of the history of technology. One might also argue that the manipulation of the original print in the hands of the performance artist as being an infringement of the copyrights of the photographer. The ethical issue here is about the concept of originality in these photographs. Under Section 13, in the case of a photograph, the authorship right is given to photographer, and under the rights of artistic works of the photographer, the rights are enlisted to reproduce, to communicate, to issue copies of the public, including the work in any cinematograph film or any adaptation of the work. On the question of who owns the photographs slash archives of performance art, the photographer of the performance artist, the answer to this is beyond the capacity of this presentation. The main argument here is that when photography intervenes with performance art at the stage of its documentation, ontologically and aesthetically, the photograph produced is not just a record of the performance art, but is a work of, sometimes in some cases, is a work of art in itself. This calls for a serious look into the authorship rights over the image, not just of the performance artist and the photographer, but also of the various parties that get involved, such as a museum or an estate. Thank you.
Thank you. So stay online, and then we'll have a, so stay online for the discussion at the end of the 3 presentations. So I'd like to ask our next speaker to take the stand, Emmanuel Cohen from Paris. He's an assistant professor in performance studies at Parsons, Paris, which is a part of the New School. And he has a PhD in performance studies from the Université de Picardie. And his dissertation was called The Non-Dramatic Theatre, the theatre of the Parisian avant-garde from the 1910s to the 1930s, on Gertrude Stein, Dada, and Surrealism. And since then, he has published in other areas, including on costume and fashion. And the presentation today is called Performance Through the Filter, I think still, towards a methodological approach to photographic documentation of performances on social media. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. This is very experimental for me because I've never worked on Instagram before, so brace with me. Let's start with that. Nature Morte by Hanno Imhoff is both the title of the exhibition at Palais Tokyo and the series of performances it hosted in 2021. The show is presented on the institution's website as haunted by, quote, the fleeting cycle of life and the disruptions of the present moment, where we are encouraged to walk the space between life and non-life, darkness and light, past and present, and to freely trace our own path across this vast open scene, unquote. Building on nostalgia and disenchantment, fueled with random appearances and moments of stillness, adorned by Balenciaga high fashion and energized by physical proximity with young and attractive models and musicians, dancers and tattoo artists, the performance multiplies the photogenic moments, and performers mediate their actions by using cell phones to read poems from or film each other at some point or take photos of the audience. And the filming crew also joined the fray, almost as an invitation to film the public. As so, the temptation to photograph is constant and even encouraged by the dramaturgy where performers take close shots of audience members, and the reaction of audience members in great numbers is to reach out for their phones. It was certainly all the more pressing as this was the first major performance at Palais Tokyo after 2 years of confinement in Paris. From marketing to execution, the performance appears to be a polar opposite from the 1960s performances defined as, quote, ontologically founded on disappearance and ephemerality, unquote. This haste to mediate live spectatorship, with recording and sharing devices cannot only be reduced to the scopophilic drive, Schneider, of an audience whose desires are reinforced by their anxiety in the face of unfamiliar situations, to paraphrase Suzanne Sontag. Even though photographic documentation of performances has existed for a long time, Nature Morte seems to open new perspectives to comprehend the relationship between spectatorship and archival practices, modeling in the same movements the temporality of performance, as well as the role of performers and spectators, photographers and archivists. Indeed, with intermediate performance, one could ask, Where and when does the outside of the artwork commence? How is it circumscribed, and are archival objects exterior to this? We could also add who to this list of questions. Secondly, I started with the hypothesis that Instagram, as a social media platform liked by artists and art lovers, participates in the rewriting of the temporal and agential parameters of the performance. It is also a medium welcoming to fashion, with a third of the accounts dealing with fashion in 2019, which will become important in the rest of the presentation. With its own temporality, networks of signification and visibility, no image posted on Instagram is just an image. The ubiquity of its syncopated times is evident. The ultimate goal would then be to understand what it changes when researching and analyzing a performance piece through that platform. Today, more than a universal methodology, I would like to propose a reflection on the methodological discoveries I made when working on Instagram as a source of information, and through this engage in a discussion on the role of live amateur photography during performances, and if we can complexify this expression. Unfortunately, the technicalities of Instagram and its algorithm will not be explored in detail, as access to data about the circulation of images has been limited despite my efforts to contact Instagram and the community manager of the Palais Tokyo and some of the curators. I realized quickly that I had wrong understanding of how Instagram works when I started. Indeed, according to the website of the company, Instagram is a free sharing photos and videos app where people share with their followers or with a select group of people, friends. It goes on. They can also view, comment, and like posts shared by their friends on Instagram. Contrary to my prejudice, images posted are filtered through the platform's reticular system, and the app does not provide an unlimited access to content, even though I've seen millions of people taking photos of nature morte. The amount of information accessible, even when using hashtags for searches, depends on the user's history on the platform, who they follow, what content they interact with, etc. Looking for documentation of specific performances on Instagram is not an easy task, as it necessitates some planning. I could not recreate the experience of looking at the feeds during the time the performance was on to see what images were shot with me, yet I could search and use the option search using hashtags, handles, and locations to get an understanding of what was shared and by whom. In my case, my options to conduct an extensive quantitative survey were meager. One, methodically searching for images using the various options available on the app interface, such as hashtags, hashtag Palais Tokyo, hashtag Animoff, hashtag Eliza Douglas, the woman you've seen on the first image, hashtag Nature Morte, which is also meaning many different still life in French, etc. I could identify as being used by the artist and shareholders, and the search option by location. Two, collecting images by potential viewers of the performance through other canals. I emailed people in my university and got 3 answers. 3, adding accounts who follow Palais Tokyo, Anno Imhoff, and Eliza Douglas as one of the main performers, and screening their feeds for more images so I could identify potential attendees, follow the private accounts, and access their images otherwise invisible to me. The 2 later options meant collecting images through a bias I could identify more clearly than Instagram's algorithm. Through all of these strategies, I collected more than 100 images coming from about 22 accounts or so. It took me a while. I had to stop searching for images due to time constraints and repetitiveness in the content found. So, anatomy of Instagram. Here you have 3 images. Personal account, which is very telling. In the bottom, you have here, it's the gallery, and you see images presenting like that. In the middle, it's the reels, so videos, short videos. And the last icon is for images you have been tagged in. Your handle has been used. So it's not you who takes the picture, but someone who's posting a picture thinking maybe you're in it or you're connected to the event. Then we have streaming the feed. This looks like this. On top, you have the stories, and below that, you have each post that feeds in, like that follows each other. And then the search interface, where you can use hashtags, location, and you see a random selection of images based on your history. That's why I'm not showing my images. Then the hidden content here, the algorithm. Through its user posts, Instagram projects traces of the performance in the system worked by the past history of its users, their followers, and an algorithm presiding over its visibility or disappearance. As its algorithm values interaction and activities in the feed over chronology since 2016, it can make some content present for longer periods of time, making them temporal ubiquitous objects producing ghosts of the past event stuck in a loop of endless actualizations by avid likers and beholders. Limitations. This study is not a quantitative study about the circulation and visibility of images. Its scope is limited as data related to the activity of accounts of the main protagonists, Anno Imhoff, Eliza Douglas, Palette Tokyo, other curators in my case, on Instagram was not accessible to me, even though I could engage in a qualitative approach focusing on several aspects: the users, the content, leading to reflection on the interaction of users as photographers and spectator as archivists. Some quantitative information about what I found. So there were about 22 accounts with Anno Imhoff and Eliza Douglas. They can be broken down into several groups: artists and performers, or people working on the performance, actors of the French art world that went to the performance and shared it that I could access, and magazines and advertising sites. And finally, a number of accounts, I'm not really sure who they are. The typology here is dominated by artists and people involved in the performance. They represented the largest number of accounts I stumbled upon, followed by people involved in the art world. Professional photographers coming to expand their portfolio were also very important. There were only 7 videos, which I'll address later, and almost all the accounts posted 2 or more images of the performance. Those who posted 1 image per post multiplied the number of posts, which impacted negatively their number of likes. A third of the images I collected have Eliza Douglas on them also. So due to my research technique using hashtags, I only got access to people who tagged we used the hashtag. That means people who wanted to be found. So I don't have access to private accounts and people who didn't know what was going on. The setup, parameterizing the relationship between photography, bodies, and performance. Where and when does the performance stops and documentation starts? These are truly relevant questions for nature morte because of the spatial and temporal parameters of the piece itself. It's both an ambulant and widespread performance that starts outside of the Palais Tokyo before slowing progressing inside. It's also a durational one lasting several hours, which allows for multiple actions to take turn or to overlap, as 22 performers roam the space in a way that is reminiscent of Tino Sehgal's performances, one of which happened at Palais Tokyo in 2017. Photographing it as a form of documentation for oneself makes sense when you want to remember it. As an audience member, a feeling of distance and loss governs over the performance. Loss in appearance are an integral part of the dramaturgy of the piece. The performance functions as a game of hide and seek, where performers have to elbow their way through a dense crowd, making them invisible most of the time, or organize their sudden appearances in unexpected locations. Based on my database of posts and a review of the literature on photography and social media activity, I could identify 5 different types of motivation presiding over the taking and posting of photos. And they are not mutually exclusive. First, the live dimension, and maybe I can show more. The live dimension of the photos connected to the indexical quality of photos, like the social value of the images. Experiencing an event live has a higher value than seeing it in photos. So people like to show what they attended thanks to photo documentation as proof. They hope to gain more recognition for it, something that the audience seemed to have integrated. Sharing it, that this experience is known to others and envied maybe makes it even more tempting and valuable. Then the social media dimension. Attending a trending event can have benefits for people who use Instagram as a source of income for their ego or for their profit. Followers you have, the more accounts it will reach. This is mechanical, which also increases your chances to receive likes. And the more people react to your post within the first hours of sharing, the more its probability to be seen by others will go up. The likes you receive send your pictures up in the feed, exposing the post to even more accounts, keeping in that presence of actualization. The fandom effect. I called it stardom, but because of the discussion, I'm going to call it fandom effect. The cast of the performance is also an important factor that explains the interests of audience members to snap a picture. Eliza Douglas, beyond her collaboration with Anne Imhoff, is known for being a visual artist and a musician, but more so for a modeling job for Balenciaga. In 2016, she started working with Demna Gvasalia and became the face of the brand. Dominique Fike, songwriter, singer, actor, is also a model for Yves Saint Laurent, and his face is all over Paris at the moment. He's also an actor in Euphoria, a TV show that is extremely famous among a younger audience. As indexes, photo attests of the co-presence of the photographer and their model, adding the value of exclusivity that it represents to attend the performance live with such people. The technological dimension. Now, Meta does not communicate on the algorithms used on Instagram nor on Facebook. Since 2008, we know that Instagram algorithm, quote, adopting an artificial intelligence and big data-based work system. The way Instagram algorithm works is categorized in several points, such as post-exposure, shadow bands, interaction, Instagram stories, hashtag, edit caption, and also post and repost. Depending on that, your picture, your post weighs more or less and has more chances of being seen. This process, this means that photos are not treated as a unidimensional document valued for their informative nature, but as complex layers of information. This process, sampling, dissects the image for its aesthetic values, content, and context, such as hashtags, but also who sees it, at what time the photo has been posted. Is it something that you have posted a lot and people, your follower, interacted with? A value, so we could call it a digital exchange value measured through the activity of both content creators and viewers, a value that is recalculated for each user. Apparently, Instagram algorithm controlling the feeds has more than 100 parameters that it evaluates for each feed, each photo. As Hito Steyerl put it about online photos, it transforms quality into accessibility, exhibition value into cult value, films into clips, contemplation into distraction, end of quote, and performances into snippets, we could add. Of course, these parameters weigh more on your scrolling experience live, and digging up for photos as I did on accounts is not submitted to the same variations. However, it leaves a trace on the image as likes, comments, and reposts are visible. All these elements function as many incentives to take one's phone and record via photos or videos, a practice enforced in France since 2014 by the Minister of Culture in the program Tous photographes, or Everyone is a Photographer, and an exponential phenomenon in museums documented all over the world. So photographing as a form of performance now, but what are those photos doing to the performance? It's been theorized that the space exists between the performance and its photographic or video captation by the audience. It's an intermediate one, complementary to the one of the script and the one of the interpretation or body engagement of the performer. It becomes a space for the audience to perform a numeric or digital identity. And also for the artist to create value in their artwork based on visibility. Once we've said that, what does it mean in the context of IMOF's performance? With photography and as free of professional responsibilities, audience members have agency in defining moments of interests. As Susan Sontag famously noted, quote, "A photograph is not just the result of an encounter between an event and a photographer. Picture taking is an event in itself." And one with even more peremptory rights to interfere with, to invade, or to ignore whatever is going on, end of quote. Audience members snap a picture when they want and frame it to their liking. It's a deliberate choice that expresses their adherence to the content. It connects them with imaginaries on Instagram, accessible by searching the account's photos, but also the photos in which people are tagged. For instance, here you're seeing all the photos where Eliza Douglas and Anna Imhoff are being tagged, replacing those photos of the performance into this imaginary about contemporary art, minimalist contemporary art, high fashion, pop culture, edgy, fashion. If you scroll their accounts, you'll see that both Anna Imhoff and Eliza Douglas are associated with art and fashion and counterculture, many quotes. Anna Imhoff is also known for collaborating with Burberry and proposing a very similar looking setting and aesthetics. Also, it was outside. The profile, getting photos and tagging them are emulating the same atmosphere by extension and creating their online persona based on those qualities. Amateur photographs they embody different situations on the paper compared to commissioned documentation that reflects. Okay, should I conclude? Yeah. So I compared Professional Photography by Nadine Franksovich, which is the collaborator of Anna Imhoff on those and random photographs I could find. And so you do have the same scenes, the same elements most of the time. What is different here is the framing, the quality of the picture, the distance to the object. On the left, it's the professional photographer, so it's closer, better. The quality of the image is better as the one on the right, which is more grain, and shows that the people were zooming in with digital zooms. So conclusion. As Meckfield Widrich questions in The Informative Public of Performance, the role of the initial audience needs to be reassessed, and their social media's participation might be a new way to do so, as in cases like Naturemort, they actively participate in the unfolding of the performance during and in the afterlife of it. But it needs also to be nuanced through a careful understanding of the mediation Instagram produces. Not only can we see parallels between the use of live photo documentation in Imhoff's work for Burberry and Naturemort and their ability to circulate images connected to one location to a greater audience, but more generally, what Imhoff puts in motion in our performances is the reproducibility of image as desire, and as such increases the power of models to shape daily life's vestimentary and behavioral decisions for their audience. They themselves are mediums of a type of futurity based on repetition and exclusivity, glamorization and objectification, individualism and standardization. Like images, they are the lumpen proletariat of this system. By looking at images on Instagram, the offstage of the performance reappears, and advertising and amateur content and artistic content tend to blend together in a new cycle of life for images. Thank you.
So I'd now like to ask our third and final speaker of the day to take the stand. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Wiebke Leister, who is a German artist based in London, who works in many different interdisciplinary contexts. She teaches an MA in photography at the London College of Communication, and she's also the organizer of a research forum and research network entitled The Theatre of Photography, which is dealing with sort of hybrid definitions of performativity. She's published in very many different contexts with a very clear focus on photography and theatre and this interaction. And today she's going to be talking on something slightly different on Japanese no theatre. So I'm very intrigued, Wiebke, and you may now begin. Thank you.
Shall I say my thank yous again? Oh, that's much better. well, thank you. So let's start. Oh, that's not working either. What do I do in order to move this forward? Sorry. No, that's good. I can use those now. Right, so I've taken a drastic decision last week to introduce you to one of my recently finished work in more detail, and therefore I'm going to race you through a detour of my interest in Japanese no theatre for the next 10 minutes. Then I ask Christopher to rudely interrupt me, and, and then I give you a kind of like 10 minutes reading of this recently completed project. That's the idea. My starting point is really to ask, can there be a photographic no play? And that's playing this idea from Yeats, the idea of, can there be an English no play? Can we translate the medium of theater into the medium of photography? The first, and I've made 2 pieces of work about that. The first one was called Echoes and Afterlives, and it looked very closely at the relationship of the male actor and his mask. And the second one that I've recently finished is called Echoes and Callings, and it looked at the demonic transformation of female characters through anger. Let's have a look at how that works. Introduction for Cosimo. Speaking amongst theater scholars here today, most of you probably have a pretty good idea about the complexities of no theater and how it has influenced modernist performance practices. My own research sits in the discipline of photography, within which I'm using no theater as a methodology for thinking about non-representational strategies and how they can be brought to thinking about photography, not as a document, not as a copy, not as a mimetic strategy, but as a means of escaping the constraints of naturalistic depiction. In my academic work, I've published about the performative non-likeness as a critique of photographic portraiture, while my artistic practice is equally interested in using the image of the body and the face as a medium or catalyst to think about our relationship with others and how we relate to images of another. For instance, what happens when the image field is not a field of projection or identification, but a hostile encounter? What if the image is a difficult image, an image that does not like us, does not encourage us, trigger empathy or agreement? And what is it that these images want if their body is an event that unfolds in time, a performative act that provokes the viewer? For instance, if these images do not portray a screaming person, but if the image is actually screaming at us here and now as we look at it, and not a record of a scene captured by a photographer. Today, I want to talk about a long-term project that I've been engaged with for almost 10 years now, trying to understand no theater and what photography can learn from it. No is a form of mass drama that revolutionized storytelling in theater in many ways, but most significant in our content is that no plays start from the point where most Western tragedies end, from the death of its main protagonist. The plays revolve around revisions of ghosts who reveal an unresolved issue of the past. As David Wiles explains, in Japanese no plays, the dead linger as ghosts because they cannot lay their memories to rest. Long suppressed secrets buried in the past that bind them to a place, remorsefully remembered acts of passion that make them restless, punishment for violent acts that keep them in limbo, earth-binding love, hate, or anger that prevents their release from the karmic wheel. Accordingly, all no dramas involve revisitations by immortal spirits who return from the world of the dead to the world of the living in quest for salvation and release of their unhappy souls. The ghost is the main character of the play, making connections between the living and the dead as the audience encounters beings who talk about the death in the present tense. Just like Muzuto Takahashi summarizes, it may be said that in No, the cruelty of life on earth is illuminated from across the boundaries that separate us from the afterlife, a way of understanding life by looking at death. Ronald Keane describes No is perhaps the most difficult form of theater to photograph. Long intervals pass virtually without motion on stage, to be succeeded by brief and violent action. The photographer seldom has a second chance if he misses the first time. A no play is performed in the season in which it is associated, and often, but just a single time. The photographing of the masks, however, poses the greatest problem. They are prized for their ability to shift expression, and the photographer therefore bears the responsibility through his choice of elements of the performance, which in itself is a collage in time and space of a still mask on an animated body on a theater stage in a photographic frame of a technical apparatus shown in a visual medium. So what I'm showing here is the first trigger for my first work that was called Echoes and Afterlives, where I'm looking at this idea of how the actor engages with the mask. And there is this moment in the mirror room where the actor kind of meditates, supposedly, over the mask, takes the body, the image into the body, and then becomes that character. There's a lot of wonderful mythology around this action. But what is really important there to say is what we are learning is this idea of how the mask, in an almost photographic way, I say, picks up expression by lowering the head or turning it upwards, but also how the actor operates with the light in the space through his very coded movements. And I'm saying his here all the time because classically there are only male performers. What I've done with that is that I've worked in a performance where I literally photographed insides of masks, very different masks, and portrayed actors. And I portrayed the actors in such a way that they became almost objects. And then I photographed masks in the way that they were almost subjects. And they fold on top of each other as you leave through the publication, which was then the trigger for a performance that I did at King's Place in London in 2016, where together with two sound artists, we kind of like worked through these different modes of how that can be put into action. We were using different trigger points and a kind of choreography to work through this folding of the mask onto the face. I'm taking too much time, Christopher. This is the performed performance, the performed publication after the performance. And that can then be remediated, if you like, shown again in an exhibition space. But the second project I'd like to share with you now and that I'd like to spend a little bit more time on is called Echoes and Callings. And it's kind of like looking at the necessity, I say, of the angry female character into a fierce demoness. And I think we're looking here at the Edo period, and we're looking also at women today, and we're looking at this idea of that, what it actually means to be angry. Do we have a right to be angry? What happens with Me Too, but also what happens with when the culture that's around you doesn't allow you to express anger. And for the reason that you can't express anger, you have to become a demon. And there are 4 famous demon plays. Sorry, I'm just jumping loads of slides now. In the repertoire, we've got those 4 plays that I've underlined here that work through the different characteristics of this Hanya figure, from effectively a still very human Hanya that has got a right to be angry, to a very inhuman animalistic Hanya that effectively eats up the people who wronged her in her human life. What I've skipped earlier is that every no play has got a first part where we encounter a stranger, and then there's a second part to find out that this stranger is actually the Hanya ghost returning from the afterlife in order to put something right, to take revenge, or to be released. There's a lot of monks at play who pray for lost souls, but there is this wonderful moment of transformation between the first and the second part that is activated very beautifully in those plays. In the first part, these characters are usually portrayed through the Dagon mask. You can see here through the gold of the eyes and the teeth that this is already a kind of god creature, supernatural creature. But in the second part, I'm jumping bits here again, the features protrude, she grows horns, the eyes are bulging out, the features are widening, the gold gets stronger, and the anger portrayed in red usually rises up her face, and she just becomes this creature that takes over the space. Here we're looking at the play Canava, which is actually a tragic love story, and there are 2 different kinds of masks that I can't go into now, how she's being portrayed, and the actor, which is really important, chooses that mask. And it is in that choice that we then also see how they portray this moment of transformation. This is a page from the second part of the play where she actually resumes why she is so angry and why her life is being consumed by reproachful feelings, as she says here. I was then very inspired by Yoko Ono performing at MoMA, and kind of like worked on my own variation of this very famous Fluxus performance as a prompt for my own performances with actresses. And I wrote it into a 4-part performance that I did with actresses to kind of like think about that scream of anger with pain, with fear, with anger, and to frighten. What is interesting, what I skipped also earlier, is that the mask of the Hanya is a combined impossible expression, and it's one thing that makes her really interesting to work with, because the top half of the face is actually a kind of expression of sadness and is combined with an expression of anger, and you can't reproduce that in the studio, so but photography can't do it. And I found that really interesting if we're thinking about the tradition of montage theory, of montage being used as part of collage strategies also in art. I'm coming to it, Christopher. So what became of that is a 20 minutes performance where I also worked with live performance to effectively have these images on a table, and they were being live collaged in that moment, again with working with David Toop and the quite famous no flautist Isu Yokohiro from Japan, where we're trying to kind of like build up this Johaku, this kind of like a crescendo that is significant for a no performance. I could tell you much more, but I won't. I will tell you, how am I doing for time? I will try and read you what my result is of those questions that I've been posing. So just to remind you, I was asking, can there be a photographic no play? Can there be a revisitation of the Hanya figure, not as a kind of jealous person, but as a kind of woman who's trying to fight back, quite literally in this case? And what can I learn from this relationship between the actor and the mask? And here is an answer in photographs and text. Where is it? In these pages, we will be meeting Hanya and Namaurani and possibly Hashihime, angry spirits who emerge from Japanese no drama and storytelling. Female characters perpetually referred to as deranged, possessed, or jealous, who were unable to speak for themselves during their human lives because of suicidal pressures and injustice. They had to transform into demons to become spitting, revolting, brutal, unforgiving creatures, women who were forced out of their bodies beings who remain in limbo between life and death. Furious ghosts who are not mad, but mad at someone, mad about something that was done to them while passively endured until something cracked. Broken by grief or transfigured by rage, pain, or betrayal, then activated. Rushing forward with all their might, they are encountered through their transformative states, their images now returning ghosts, apparitions, and echoes, seeking both revenge and release. In Word and Image, we follow their imaginary genealogy, re-embodied, contradictory, and intertextual, telling tales of silence and manifestation, distress and embodiment, stillness and fury, building the crescendo of a single emotion from figuration to abstraction. Body in pieces, mouth agape, shouting or screaming, troubled and maltreated, while setting out to frighten, conjuring another self from their liminal existence as they reveal themselves as terrifying images, showing that other face of terror to the world. In this way, they have existed throughout times and cultures, but today, more than ever, their images are recognized as released and untamed, and finally speaking out loud. So this play that I've written is in 3 voices, really. There's a chorus, a woman, and a reciter. I'm going to read them all now, so it's a bit confusing, but I think you're hopefully getting the gist of it. It's in 2 parts, with 4 parts each. This is part 1. A certain place in evening light, at the foot of a mountain, at the end of a town, a crossroad ahead. Low light, howling wind, time thickens. Shivering leaves and withering papers, street lamps rustling, skies clouding over, looming out into the distance in evening light. No time to go out in the dark, no place to go out alone. A place to be met by your past, a view onto the future once had. Onto a present now absent, onto a past in the future, to revise a past once present, to be met in the dark. Calling for echoes, echoes and callings, calling echoes and callings, echoes calling for echoes and callings. Hear echoes, their callings, calling echoes, still calling these echoes, calling echoes, those callings, echoes and callings. And then she was left, surprised at first, hurt in her trust, disappointed, dissatisfied, deserted, surprised by a worthless promise. And then she was left trapped, unable to take her own decisions, depleted, degraded, depressed, unable to get unstuck from insult and aggression. And then she was left exposed, abused were her child and her body, distressed, devastated, dismantled, abused, her mind molested. And then she was left unburied, taken away by assault and violation, desolate, defaced, dismembered, taken away from a time yet to come. Oh, cruel fate, as years went by, she lay forlorn and lingered on, lamenting a life never lived, and she could not undo the past. She falls and falls into pressing loneliness. Oh, fearsome cries, bent by stream of unjust cruelties, her words unheard, always reminded of tears and terror, shadows grew deeper. She mourns and mourns, torn apart by helplessness. Oh, shade and sorrow, body no more her own, hating herself so deeply, mind unrecognizable, only wishing to vanish from this world, she sinks and sinks into untold bitterness. Oh, hopeless state, as if stuck to her skin, impressed onto her vision, a strangling abyss, unable to see her reflection, she drowns and drowns, worn out by dark resentfulness. Oh, vexing doubt, absorbed by pain, not breathing the waves of darkness, how eerie her tormented cries into nightfall. She stirs and stirs, following her scornfulness. Angry yellow, wrathful, hopeless, foreboding yellow, grievously alarming, treacherous yellows, pain, betrayal, defeat, defense, attack, release. Raging yellow, not sunflower yellow, not straw yellow, scornful, contemptuous yellow, that rise over her cheeks, over her brows, into her pupils, break through the skin. Glaring yellow, dangerous, demonical, diabolical yellow, metallic stare, blazing yellows, flesh in the dark that fuels her anger, spurns her pulse, blinded by yellow. Screaming yellow, protruding horns, forked tail, triangular yellow, raiding flames, burning yellows that fork her tongue, extend her fangs. Okay, I'm almost there. Tint her scales. Okay, I'm just. So I need to go through them anyway because I don't know how else to do this. Well, that's the conclusion. Forthright women are always called demons. Harm women will always become demons. Angry women should always be known as demons, no matter what time we live in.
Thank you. Oh. Well, please. Okay, so only in 5 minutes, we see that someone waiting in the room that's our next keynote speaker. So very sorry that we've come long time, but anyway, 5 minutes. Anybody who's got questions for any of our speakers, the microphone. Yes.
Hello. It's a very simple question. Well, the answer might not be simple, but Vibeke, you were just starting to talk around about montage, and you also use montage and collage. And I was just going to touch on montage tomorrow in my work. So I was only thinking about what, I suppose in some ways, what that meant to you as a process or practice. Because this kind of layering I see as kind of to disrupt some kind of linear narrative. And also collage is sometimes seen as a kind of a composite, whereas a montage can be almost like a single image. You're creating an image out of it rather than just a composite of multiple images. But it's that layering of the montage. And I just suppose it was just what the significance of that was for you particularly.
Thanks, Richard. You know, when I think about montage, I always have to think of the late Al Rees, who was one of my teachers at the Royal College when I was doing my PhD, who was an expert in experimental film, right? So it is an ongoing conversation about whether or not montage is a specific form of collage or collage being a specific form of montage. In my view, montage usually works in time, but I would like to see it also across a book, whereas collage, I think, works for me on a page and can then obviously be transformed into a kind of montage across pages or in a kind of experimental time-based context. What it means to me is that these broken women needed representing without being represented, and it seemed a good way of kind of working on those combined expressions, you know, kind of sadness and anger, but at the same time also kind of like breaking down those very structured codes that I've so loved and learned to hate in my long time, you know, understanding of no theater. Always.
So this is a question for Gayatri. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I was very struck by the relationship between bodies and landscape and objects. And I mean, and also the question of reference, because the one image that stayed the longest was a juxtaposition with a Persian miniature, where the artist was obviously making a direct reference to that to that Persian miniature. Now, to what extent do you see both these artists sort of working with intertextual references? I mean, on the one hand, this is very clearly a non-European frame of reference, but I think many of these references are also references to, I think, Western performance art. Am I correct in that? Or are they sort of working with both these sort of cultural spheres of reference? On the one hand, Beuys perhaps, and then on the other hand, Persian miniature art. Is that correct?
I think there's a lot of references, like there's a lot of influence, obviously, of Western artists that come from Euro-American art scenes. Like the very fact that you're creating a work by juxtaposing an image with your own photograph. It's not a new thing to do. Like we have artists like Vito Acconci have already done these kind of works. But with these two artists, what is very interesting and what stands out is that they kind of look into their own inspirations, which are very personal to them. For Inder, it would be, since I missed I think I was too fast, or like the slide just got stuck. I was trying to make a point that, he's very much influenced by the concept of ghazal poetry, in which there's a refrain at the end of each line, which is something that is connecting to the entire he calls it as an architectural structure of poetry, where each couplet or each sentence connects to the other, but are autonomous in each end. And so what he's trying to create through his archive is that he's taking two images that he kind of, one is his archival image, or it could be any image from, I've just shown you a few of these images from the group of the book that he's creating. So he's kind of trying to create these two on a connecting line of thought. He's trying to put these two images together and connect them, just like in ghazal poetry. I was trying to make it very philosophical, but it's hard to understand because the artist is bound to many positions. And so what he's trying to do is that rather than showing his bunch of photographs as a as a reference to what happened during his performances, he rather create a book with he rather create a book with two images that he finds are appropriate. He would say that if somebody wants to see my work that he has created for 20 years, I rather create a new meaning to this, rather than show the bunch of photographs that are there in his laptop or hard drive. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we actually have to close down the session now, according to the signals and signs I'm getting. So thank you very much to our three presenters. Well, it was a bit of difficult conditions, but still three very interesting, very different papers, and short break, and then we come back for the keynote with Amelia Jones. Thank you very much.